Hey everyone, it's Neil from Coding for Real. You've decided you want to learn web development. Absolutely amazing. It is a great skill to know. It's very, very useful. There is a lot of demand for web developers right now, and it has such a great community as well. In saying that, I understand that there is so many technologies out there. How are you supposed to know exactly which one to use? That is exactly the question that I'm going to be answering in this video. I'm going to be taking a look at all of the front end and the back end technologies, and make sure you stick around until the very end where I'm going to give you my recommendations for technologies you should learn to become a web developer right now. You. Yeah, you. I'm talking to you behind the computer screen. Hit that subscribe button yet? It's okay if not. I'll wait. You hit it? If you didn't hit it yet, all you're doing is making everyone else that's watching this video wait. So in web development, there are two very distinct disciplines. There is front end and back end. And I know there is also full stack, but people that are coming into web development that are brand new should not be looking at getting into full stack web development. They need to learn either front end or back end first. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to break it into front end technologies and back end technologies. The front-end technologies that I'm going to be discussing are HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, Sass, TypeScript, JavaScript, and then a whole bunch of JavaScript frameworks such as Angular, Vue, React, jQuery, and we are crossing over into the back-end slightly now. The back-end technologies I'm going to be discussing are Python, C#, PHP, C++, Java, and Ruby. The first technology is HTML. HTML is hypertext markup language, and it's the standard language that defines the structure of all web pages. It's actually used by 94% of all websites, with HTML5, which is the latest iteration, being used by 90.1%. Some pros of HTML are it's easy to use and it is everywhere. Some cons: a lot of code is required for a seemingly simple task. It's not very security conscious. Yeah, security, we need you at the main console. HTML is here. That's right. HTML is in the building. And it lacks functionality. CSS is known as cascading style sheets. It is a styling language that is used to format the look of markup, or HTML. It's actually used by 96.2% of all websites. Some pros to CSS: speed, it is very easy to use, and it does have good browser support. Some cons to CSS: it has some difficulties with cross-browser functionality, and it is lacking in security features. Bootstrap is actually the most popular free and open source framework for creating responsive web layouts. It's a framework for CSS and JavaScript whose aim is to speed up production and encourage consistency. Currently, it's used by 27.2% of all websites, which is quite high if you consider the vast amount of frameworks that are available. Some pros of Bootstrap: speed, it has a very well maintained code base and it is fully featured. Some cons, and this first one is just my personal opinion: it is overused. Features from Bootstrap are literally everywhere. You get some Bootstrap, and you get some Bootstrap, and you get some Bootstrap. Everybody gets some Bootstrap. Once you know Bootstrap, you see features from it in most of the websites you go to, whether it be a hamburger menu, whether it be an image slideshow. It's literally everywhere. But this can also be a pro. Another con is that it's just CSS, and a lot of the time you'll need to edit your page, you'll need to edit the Bootstrap in order to make your page stand out. Sass is known as Syntactically Awesome Style Sheet. It's a CSS preprocessor, which means that it's interpreted down into CSS. It is very similar to CSS, but adds functionality. CSS is catching up in terms of functionality though, so a decline in the use of Sass is being observed, with developers leaning towards complete CSS tools such as Post CSS, which allows developers to pick and choose which plugins to use. Sass was voted by 77.27% of developers to be their preferred preprocessor. Pros of Sass are that it is very stable, it's powerful, and it's quite elegant to work with and to read. Some cons of Sass: it is slightly harder to learn than CSS. You do lose the ability of a lot of inbuilt browser inspector functionality, and at its core, it's just CSS. JavaScript. JavaScript is an object-oriented programming language that is primarily used in web development as a way to implement complex features. It can be used for back-end processes, but it is more known for its front-end usability. Some pros of JavaScript include its speed and its simplicity to use. Some cons: it is lacking browser support. It does have a lack of debugging facilities, and it can be difficult to learn. With JavaScript, there are so many frameworks. So I'm just going to touch on some of the more popular frameworks now. A framework is essentially an added tool set that you use with a programming language to change certain features of it or to make it more accessible. React. React is a JavaScript library that is used to create fast and interactive user interfaces. It is developed by Meta or Facebook. It's used by around 2.9% of websites, and around 32.3% of professional developers say that they use it. Some pros of React: it is simple, it is quick to develop, and it's free. Some cons are it's difficult to work with for SEO purposes. AngularJS. AngularJS is a JavaScript library that is used to create single-page applications. It uses the front end of the mean stack, which is MongoDB, Express.js, Angular, and Node.js. It's developed by Google. An interesting thing is that of December 31st, 2021, Google will no longer update Angular, so they recommend upgrading to Angular version 2. A study by Stack Overflow revealed that 32.4% of professional developers utilize AngularJS to create user interfaces. Some pros of AngularJS: performance, and it does allow for fast prototyping. Some cons: it is quite difficult to learn. It does come with mandatory JavaScript knowledge, and it can be slower to render to the browser. Vue.js. Vue.js is a JavaScript library used for building user interfaces and single-page applications. It works by extending HTML elements to create custom elements that the Vue compiler attaches to. Around 15.5% of all professional developers use the framework. Some pros of Vue.js: it is easy to learn and it has JavaScript flexibility. Some cons: there are limited plugins available. jQuery. jQuery is a JavaScript library designed to simplify DOM manipulation and make JavaScript shorter to write. It's easily the largest JavaScript library and the most widely used. A whopping 48.3% of all professional developers say they use the framework. Some pros: it's simple to use and it's very fast to code with. Some cons: the library is huge. There is so much to learn. It's big! And unfortunately, it's still not supported by all browsers. TypeScript. TypeScript is a strict syntactical superset of JavaScript used to develop large projects, both website and web app, with both client and server-side functionality. It is developed by Microsoft. Its popularity is on the rise in recent years, and even the framework Angular is written in TypeScript. Around 60% of all JavaScript programmers use TypeScript, and this number is climbing. Some pros of TypeScript: it utilizes object-oriented programming. It is simple to use, given that you know JavaScript, as it is written the same as JavaScript. Some cons: it can be quite hard to integrate and use with a CMS, which is a content management system. Python. Python is an interpreted high-level general-purpose programming language. It supports multi-paradigm and is dynamically typed. It's mainly used for AI and machine learning, but it is also used for server-side security. It's currently used by around 1.4% of websites, and 48.24% of people involved in web development say they use Python as their main language. Some pros: it is object-oriented. It has lots of support libraries, and it's easily scalable. Some cons: it uses a primitive database system. PHP. PHP is a loosely typed general purpose scripting language developed with web development in mind. It's strictly server side. It is pre-processed down to HTML. Uses include database interaction, CMSs, cookies, validation, authentication, stuff like that. It's used by 78.8% of all websites in the world for their server side purposes, but interestingly, only around 21.98% of developers say they use it. Some pros of PHP: there are plenty of frameworks, it's really easy to use, and there is a great community of developers behind it. Great community. Some cons of PHP: it does lack in error handling functionality, and it can be slower to develop than some of the other back-end languages. Java. Java is a high-level, general-purpose, class-based, object-oriented programming language and is considered one of the most popular languages for client-side web applications. It's developed by Sun Microsystems, which is now Oracle. It's used by around 35.35% of developers. Some pros of Java: there's heaps of open source libraries, and it has really strong security features. Actually, guys, cancel that security call. Java has shown up. That's correct. Java is here. No need for security. Some cons of Java: it is slow and there aren't many templates available. C#. C# is a general purpose multi-paradigm programming language, and it is part of the .NET framework. It's used by around about 27.86% of developers. Some pros of C#: it is object-oriented. It can be used for any type of web development. It is fast to compile and execute. Some cons: it is not overly flexible, and it does have a steep learning curve. Ruby. Ruby is an interpreted, high-level, dynamically typed, general-purpose programming language that was designed with simplicity in mind. Everything is an object in Ruby. Only 6.75% of developers say that they use Ruby. Some pros of Ruby: it is flexible. It is simple and fun. It's easy to learn, and there is a large suite of libraries. Some cons of Ruby: some add-ons are needed if you are developing on anything other than Linux, because Ruby was developed for Linux originally, and it does need a large memory cache to develop with. C++. C++ is a general purpose programming language created as an extension of the C programming language, or as it sometimes is known, C with classes. C++ has grown a lot over time, and modern C++ now has object-oriented, generic, and functional features. C++ was designed with an orientation toward system programming, with performance, efficiency, and flexibility of use as its design highlights. C++ is a very technical language, but it is extremely powerful and has extensive libraries. It is used by around about 24.31% of developers worldwide. Some pros of C++. C++ has very wide support because it is a very popular language. It is very powerful, and because it is compiled, it is very fast. Some cons of C++. It is unsafe. Its object-oriented system is a little bit basic when compared with other languages. The syntax is quite complex, and the standard library is small, making it a complicated language to learn. It is syntactically strict. So there it is, guys. You've made it to the end of the video. Just as I promised, I am going to tell you what my recommendations are for programming languages you should be learning if you are new to web development right now. First of all is web page development. Now, this all comes with a caveat, and that caveat is HTML and CSS. I feel that they are so common these days and so easy to learn. Whether you want to learn front end or back end, it's all exactly the same. You need to know HTML and CSS regardless. So you definitely need to learn HTML and CSS. Now, the most important language if you want to learn web page, front end, that's going to be JavaScript with the React framework. And you'll also want to learn jQuery as well. For back end, it's going to be PHP. And that's not just because I am a PHP developer. That is because of the uses that PHP has and how simple it is to learn. Now for web apps front end, I do recommend learning JavaScript again, but with the Vue.js framework and also jQuery. And then for web app back end, I do recommend Ruby with a gem, which is called Ruby on Rails. So that's it, guys. That is my recommendations for what languages you should learn if you're brand new to web development right now. Thank you so much for watching the video to the end, guys. If you haven't done so already, please do hit the subscribe button. It really does help the channel out by helping me to reach and teach more people. Programming is a big passion of mine and I want to pass that on to as many people as possible. So please do the right thing and hit the subscribe button. Much love from me, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.